Welcome to the Story 516 podcast, where we sit down with Christians from across denominations and talk about how God is at work in the world today and inspire you to see God at work in your own life in new ways. All right, welcome to the Story 516 podcast. I'm your host, Zach, and joining me today is a friend of mine, Matt Johnson. Matt, welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So, could you give me just a little bio, what you want all the dozens of listeners we have right now to know about you?
Okay, so yeah, my name's Matthew. Let's see, I'm currently 32, nearly 33. I guess I've been working for the last decade or so at a small company called Rock 30 Games. Basically like a budget GameStop, in a way, although we more specialize in older items, all sorts of stuff, mostly video games from like Atari and Super Nintendo and stuff on up. But I guess I grew up at a very young age. I was attended a Lutheran church. That's where my family went. Around, must have been 10 or 11 years old, maybe 10 to 12, somewhere in there, close there. We started going to an Assembly of God church in Lisbon. It was kind of a nearby town to where I was going to school and stuff, but went to school there and started going to church in Lisbon. So I kind of grew up from then on. If you've heard previous episodes, it sounds like Ethan was on here before. Yep. His dad was actually pastoring that church in Lisbon at the time, so that's how I met Ethan. So I'm really good friends with him. We kind of grew up together at that church before they moved to Fargo and started Heartland. Yeah, after that, I pretty much when I moved to Fargo, I attended Heartland, which again a branch under the Assembly of God denomination, and that's where I've been pretty much ever since.
So I was curious, you've worked your way up to a manager position. Has that impacted the way you see God or given you any interesting insights being in charge of people like that? I've worked a lot of jobs where I've been kind of the low-ranking guy on the totem pole. Haven't been a manager myself, really. So I'm just curious if that's impacted how you think about spiritual things.
I think there's been a few things. The biggest thing is, when I started at Rock 30, I was the new guy, bottom of the totem pole. I was just there as a worker. Opportunity came along. I worked hard. I grew up on a farm. I had enough of a background in putting effort in. So I knew that putting effort in, you put the effort in and rewards come down the road. So I put in a lot of effort and I tried hard, and opportunity came along to be the assistant manager, and I took that opportunity. I actually, it was a weird situation. I was going to get a job working for Bobcat, which is a manufacturing type job, decent wages, all that. And I had said, hey, I have to go take this other job. And there was they asked me to hold off for a couple hours, and they essentially offered me the job of the assistant manager that had been vacant for a little bit. And I took this lower paying job over the Bobcat job because I enjoyed the place. I enjoyed the job and the work and the people, and I stuck around. And, a year later, I managed to, the manager job became open. I moved up to that role. From there, I think the biggest thing is I see a lot of people who end up in the manager or the leader type position, but they really, a lot of times they end up acting more like a boss. I do tend to find the word boss to have some negative connotations behind it. I usually see a boss as the dude sitting in the office or the dude sitting up on his high chair kind of barking these orders, whereas I see leaders being those types of people that instead of being up on and they still might work up in an office, but they're usually the types of people that'll come down out of the office and wander around with the other folks and talk with them and get to know them and lead by example. And I guess I see this correlation of, the way Christ gave us all these really strong examples, and he didn't just sit somewhere as a carpenter, make some things out of wood, do nothing. He went around and he he showed people like a better way to live. And so I see some correlations there of just the way Christ you like led by example, rather than just preaching at people.
That's interesting that you bring that up, because that kind of inspired me to think about how a lot of people around Jesus were hoping he would act, and they were hoping he would be this militant leader to come overthrow Rome, and how that kind of can correlate to the idea of like some bosses are a little more tyrannical or all controlling, and that's almost like in a way what some of the people were looking for in the Messiah. And then Jesus comes and kind of flips that on its head.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another interesting thing you mentioned was growing up on a farm, and you started kind of connecting, I think, how growing up in that environment has been a big influence on your work ethic and how you possibly even view the world today. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience on the farm and
Sure.
just things that kind of connect for you.
Yeah, absolutely. My dad farmed with my uncle. My grandpa passed away at a young age, so my dad and my uncle had inherited the farm and everything. And so I grew up like at a really young age, 3, 4, 5 years old, riding in the tractor, as my dad's going out into a field and stuff. And that continued for a while. It got to a point where my dad and my uncle couldn't really make it. I think the big issue is they each had a family, and whereas my grandpa had this plot of land that was to feed his family with 3 sons, once it came to my dad and my uncle, there was a lot more mouths to feed with both of our families. And so they struggled for a while. Eventually they stopped farming, and they both got kind of different jobs, driving trucks and different things that they were very familiar with. Yeah, so I grew up for quite a while on the farm, but even when they stopped doing straight farming, there was still, my dad had obviously grown up all the way through high school farming, and after high school just continued farming. And so it was very much, I would go to school, I would come home, and then there would be like some kind of project that needed to get done. My dad had built a wood burning stove to heat the house, so he didn't have to buy, propane or other, electricity or other fuel sources. And so I would come home from school, and it'd be 4:00, and we'd go out and cut up some fallen over trees and like load these heavy logs into trailers and stuff. So I grew up with this,
just this 1 foot in Little House on the Prairie and 1 foot in modern day.
Yeah, exactly. I just grew up with like, there was a lot of hard physical work at times, but a lot of things that, especially now when I look back at, there was times, especially when I was getting to like high school graduation-y time, I was like, man, I can't wait to get out of here. I don't have to do all this hard work anymore. But, I graduated in 2009, so it's a while ago now. I miss it, honestly. I miss the getting my hands dirty and, a little bit of physical labor and just feeling those rewards afterwards. So there was all of that. I guess there's a lot of things that are different from, a lot of other people's experiences where I definitely had my fair share of times, when I got a little older, where I'd come home and just go downstairs and play video games.
So I was curious, probably over the last 2-3 years, in what ways have you seen God show up?
That's very interesting. I guess I don't feel like I've had like this big, huge aha like moment, but I think I've had a lot of smaller moments. Things like just simple answers and different confirmations and things. I've had multiple moments with Ethan, who's been on here before. He and I have been kind of best friends for quite a while. So a lot of my stories, and I attend the church that he pastors, so a lot of my stories end up revolving around him slightly. But we've actually had some very interesting moments where one of us has, had this feeling of like, I feel like challenged about this. And one of us has said it to the other, and the other person has had like the exact same thing. We've even had it to the point where we've been like in the same service felt God like challenging us in the same way. So yeah, it's been very interesting, and it's been with that. I think with that friend, God's kind of used that friendship as a means of kind of providing these different confirmations. We're both kind of hearing this same message. We've had some cool like wow moments within that. And I've also had some interesting, experiences. If we go farther back, I realistically, my dad, my brother, and I should have all died when we were younger. I won't go into the whole story, but a miraculous moment that spared all of our lives out of nowhere. I've seen some pretty awesome things in different parts of my life.
Yeah, that's cool talking about how having that close friendship with Ethan in this case, but having a close friendship seems like it opens up the lanes of communication, the ability to even be comfortable enough around someone to bring up, hey, I'm feeling challenged in this way. So I think that's something that's really neat to think about and even question, like, who in my life do I have that relationship with that I can bring up those things? Because if you didn't feel comfortable with someone, you would never even bring that up. And the chance of having that God confirmation just doesn't exist then.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes, in some aspects, it takes a bit of a leap of faith. Ethan and I have also had really deep conversations about areas in our life, sins and things that we struggle with. And, I've been fortunate enough to have that person that I've been able to confide in and be able to trust that I know, like, this isn't going to become a topic that's passed around to other people, that, like, we're having this heart-to-heart moment. And we basically came at it from the perspective of this is biblical, to confess your sins one to another. And, within that, we both have found some very interesting results where we've talked about and confessed these sins, and we've immediately the next day felt some relief in those areas. And so it's God does some pretty powerful things when we're willing to step out a little bit in faith.
Yeah. And just that idea of taking that risk, because opening up to someone, there's an element looking back at like kindergarten and opening up and saying, hey, will you be my friend, to some random kid. There's an element of risk there as a child that kind of passes over your head for the most part, which would be nice to maintain.
Oh, absolutely.
As adults. But yeah, that's good to remember that there is an element of risk. I guess what I've learned recently is a lot of things are just good to have the knowledge about, that, yeah, there is an element of risk. I've acknowledged it, so then I maybe not as surprised when I feel uncomfortable trying to talk to someone new at church, or that one friend at church who it's like, oh, I'd like to get to know so-and-so better, and realizing, oh, it takes a little more effort and it's a little uncomfortable sometimes to try and schedule that coffee date or whatever kind of get together you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll bring out another story. I'm married. My wife and I have been married for about a little over, now it's like 3.5 years. We're expecting our first child in January. And for quite a while, we struggled to conceive. And there was some like frustrations there of like, we want to have a baby. And, I think there's lots of couples out there that can relate. I spent a lot of time there were moments prior to, when we found out we were expecting, that I was working out of town quite a bit. I was spending a lot of time in hotels as well as driving back and forth for work. And there was I
remember that. I remember you coming to church on Sunday morning and just looking exhausted. And I was like, oh, Matt, are you okay?
It was probably like, I'm about to leave again on Monday morning. So yeah, I got back Friday night and I'm going to leave on Monday again. There was a lot of time of like spent lots of my time spent on the road in prayer. Like, God, why is this so hard? And yeah, there was some frustration there of, why is this happening to us? Why are we having such a hard time conceiving a child? And then all of a sudden, it was very interesting. We try to avoid some of the unnecessary details, but we had ordered some products specifically for testing ovulation and different things, and the package from Amazon came with a couple of pregnancy tests. And my wife didn't feel like, we had never tried one of the tests yet. I was like basically barely home. I was on the road for the most part, and she didn't feel great. And she took one of these tests and it was positive. And so we had, in a way, we had taken that step out, and we were like, all right, we're going to like get this product in an attempt to try to sort this out. And as soon as we got the product, we found out we were pregnant. So it was very interesting.
Like even before using the product.
Before using the product, yep.
I think that is so cool that there's the element of not giving up, that we're going to try another option, but how God showed up in that was different than what you were maybe going for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's so important to remember, I think, in our own lives, that don't give up. Keep trying. If you're feeling like you're disconnected from God, try a different method. Maybe you need to hang out in nature more. Like, I'm speaking to the choir with that one for myself. Maybe you need to do a fast from your phone or from social media. So keep trying, but then B, also in your attempts, in your trying, be open to a different way that God will show up. Because if I go into something being like, okay, God has to show up in this way, it will look like this when God shows up, and God doesn't show up in that specific way, but he shows up in like 24 other ways, I'm not going to see those 24 ways because I'm so blinded towards them by focusing on this is how it has to look.
That's a really good point. I think for a really long time, I was expecting this, this voice in my head, or I was expecting some like audible voice to speak to me. And, I've been spending a lot of time trying to focus on listening and really trying to understand, like, how does God speak? For me, it seems to be anytime I get into a quiet place, especially away from my phone. So it's really interesting. You mentioned taking a break from the phone. I think our phones are one of our biggest distractions. Phones are distractions, but games, books, a lot of things can be distractions if we allow them to be. I think there's lots of great things out there, but I think as a society we struggle with moderation. So it's very interesting that you mentioned the phones specifically. I actually found one of the times I feel like I hear God speaking the most is when I'm in the shower. I'm away from my phone. There's no TV. There's nothing to be a distraction, and so I find myself able to just like relax and listen.
That's also interesting you mentioned that, because I do some creative writing, and I found that kind of my creativity flows a little better in those activities where there's not those distractions. So like taking a shower or going for a walk or something like that. So I think there is something to be said about those that maybe like with just a little direction, I could even explore if kind of spending time with God in those situations rather than trying to think of my next story idea would be like really good for me. So I will definitely take that away myself as something to try.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like nature. Since I was chuckled a little bit when you mentioned nature, because I have a couple of dogs, and we're in fall right now. A lot of the leaves are turning and starting to fall, and I was just standing in my backyard a few days ago, just kicking a ball. My one dog constantly needs to be playing. I was just kicking a ball, and I'd kick it, and just kind of like absent-mindedly, my head, I'd just kind of drift up, and I was just watching the wind blowing the leaves, and little leaves are falling down, and it's just like, wow, what a beautiful place. That, and I'm just in my backyard. It is nothing special. It is very small in the middle of a town. But like, if we are constantly expecting a grand mountain view while we live in a very prairie plains area, we're going to be disappointed. But if we allow ourselves to like look at the beauty of just a simple tree and a happy dog running in the leaves, it's you can really see God a lot in nature, I think.
Yeah. Well, Matt, thanks for stopping by today. It was fun to hear your stories, your experience, your perspective on all this. And I'll have to get you on again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to come back.
Thank you for joining us. You can support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/story516. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time.